back in 2002, 2003, I was a young design student at Auburn University, War Eagle. Hey, I like that. Okay, Ava, yeah, I got you. War Eagle. And our studio was working on a really cool project for B.B. King in Indianola, Mississippi. And so upon leaving Indianola, Mississippi, I met this young girl who asked me, she said, well, I've never heard of the civil rights movement. What is that? And you talk about a kick in the gut, the heart, the chest, the brain, the skull, the femur, the tibias, and all the bones, all at the same time. We got to pause.
We have a technical issue, and I want to make sure.
I want to be cute while I pause, though.
You know it worked when you tested it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I don't know what's happening now.
See, Atlanta, we influence everything, so I had to, you know. So that young girl reminded me of a young kid that I met named Dylan in 6th grade back in Durham, North Carolina, who said, well, Miss Satcher, he asked me, well, why should I care about my community when nobody else does? And I said, well, Dylan, that's a good point. Why should you? You see, for me, these experiences led me to a simple formula about what I define as inclusion, which is a direct relationship between identity and space. Who am I and my relationship with space and other people? But I actually have two faces of inclusion. You see, on one side of the coin, I come from those communities that are at most negatively impacted by gentrification, and on the other side of the flip of the coin, I am a gentrifier as well. So I've had to reconcile with that, and the way that I reconcile with that is through design and building and construction and building equitable communities. And understanding that the more I build for and with people like me who are underrepresented and underappreciated, that I become more aware, more empathetic, that I care more, that I build for those who set the standard and the legacy for me. So I have two faces. I come from those communities that have been gentrified, and as a recipient of those communities, and I'm also a gentrifier myself. So I became an entrepreneur, and I started Makers Make Hers Studio, LLC, which is based here in Atlanta, and yes, I am an Atlanta native, so shawty, I'm from Zone 3, Pittsburgh, Swat, Irish Street, Ariel Bowen, McDaniel Street, and here in Atlanta, we don't say Marietta, we say Marietta. And so I started Maker Studio as an opportunity to help you and everyone else reimagine space. That inclusion is a simple formula. It is a formula to understand who you are in your relationship with space and how space can either segregate or integrate us. And of course, we've had a long history of the former, the segregation. So it's all about reimagining space. And what I mean by that is helping you to see, my purpose is not to, my role, my obligation is not, I'm not here to empower you or anyone in this room. I don't care to do that. That's not my purpose. How dare I insult you that way? My purpose is to inspire you to empower yourself so that you understand who you are and why you do what you do and what is your role in your relationship with space, so that we can continue to facilitate conversations and look at my perspective and your perception about how we relate, how we create interesting collisions, how we create new and impactful and inclusive and integrated communities. That's why I do what I do. I am not interested in reimagining space so that we continue this history of segregating land uses only to say that the more segregated we are, the more integrated we become. That's so antithetical to progress, don't you think? I do. So we're building what we call plug-in pods. So I run a company called Maker Studio. I'm CEO and founder, and Maker Studio is a social enterprise and creative hub that provides modular turnkey solutions for equitable development. What did she just say? What does that mean? I'm glad you asked, let me tell you. So we take shipping containers, literally, and we turn them into really cool, quite comfortable spaces that we call plug-in pods for affordable housing, as urgent care clinics, as interesting commercial spaces, as artist spaces, that Fabian mentioned earlier in his pitch. And so we do this as an opportunity to reimagine space. What can you do in a small amount of space for the greatest impact? Can you put our plug-in pods, and we call them plug-in pods because we are plugging them into the existing condition, the existing context without pushing people away, because I told you that I am both a recipient and from those communities that have been gentrified, but I'm also a gentrifier. How can we reimagine and look at space where tops of parking spaces and parking decks now have affordable housing or urgent care clinics or live workspaces for doctors so that they can help those that live next to them, where people can actually work where they live, thrive, play, and innovate all at the same time. Now, I don't have to really tell you where these spaces are. I think you probably know. But this is everywhere and anywhere in the United States. See, we build our plug-in pods for anybody, anywhere, especially those that supposedly don't have a voice, but we actually do. We just never had the opportunity to have a platform like this. So that's me running my mouth, but also envisioning the opportunity for utilizing blighted properties in both the East Side Trail of the Beltline, the West Side Trail, and also vacant lots and blighted properties in Sweet Auburn. See, for us, reimagining space isn't about putting our plug-in pods and deploying them only on the west side or southwestern side of Atlanta. It's also about putting our pods and really about deploying them not in the Bluff necessarily, or only in Bankhead, but in Buckhead and Old Fourth Ward and all those parking spaces and alleyways that you see in Midtown. See, for some reason, and I'll get to this in a minute, we've been led to believe that as a real estate developer, as a gentrifier, your dollars go farther if you only put affordable housing in SWATs in Southwest Atlanta. That opportunity zones, for some reason, are always only in underrepresented communities. They're not in Buckhead, where you would think they should be. So what we are doing is continuing this 130-year myth that people should not be able to live, work, play, thrive, and innovate because they look like me. That's unacceptable. So I'm not here to be your friend. I hope we become friends. But I'm here to help you reimagine your understanding and your relationship with space and how to think about space differently and who you are and what you are. See, there's a 130-year myth. It's a lie. We all live this lie. It's a beast, and it's a beast with many faces. Matter of fact, I need everybody to stand up real quick, just real quick. I only have 20 minutes. Only 20 minutes. And I want everybody, we're going to take 3 deep breaths. Ready? 1, in, out. 2, in, out. Last one. In, out. Shh. Okay, great. I like that. Have a seat. Now, but isn't that how we feel sometimes? Like we just want to scream. Like, what can we do about the situation? I mean, how many reports and assessments do we need to know we have a housing crisis? How many more reports and assessments do we need to know that not only do we have a housing crisis, but we also have an affordable economic development crisis and a workforce development crisis and a public health crisis, all related to this notion of what is inclusion and what is diversified inclusivity. And that scream that you get when you're like, yes, power to the people. I believe that we should have access to affordable housing as long as it's just not next to me. Why do we act like that? Why do we do that? And by the way, that scream I just did took all the energy I had left in my body because I do not scream. But I did that for you because I love you guys, and I wanted you to feel my pain just for a couple of minutes. But also to show you how it feels to be a recipient like I am of communities that we're called voiceless, even though we do have a voice. We just never had an opportunity to have a stage like this to talk about this 130 myth. And you might have heard of this myth. It's a beast of many faces. You might have heard of its name. It changes names over time. Sometimes it's called redlining. Sometimes it's called zoning. Sometimes it's called eminent domain. Sometimes it's called subprime mortgage lending fraud. Sometimes it's called sundown towns. Sometimes it's called eviction, code enforcement. All of these things, gerrymandering, resegregation, suburban segregation, urban regentrification, this is a beast with many names, and it thrives off this premise. It thrives off this premise that stories should be sold, not told, well, this morning I'm here to tell it and build it differently. See, if you think that these systems don't work, these racial systems, they work very well, just not for people who look like me and most of us in this audience. So our plug-in pods, our shipping containers, this notion of reimagining space for more creative and more equitable communities, this diversification of inclusion, this simple formula of understanding who you are in relationship to space doesn't work in the existing system. It works only if we create new systems. See, we're building our plug-in pods for waitresses, for bank tellers, for artists, for musicians, for creatives, for those individuals who not only do not at this point have the opportunity and the access that we all have, but who deserve it. Who deserve it. And possibly we build a plug-in pod for that 13 and 14-year-old that I met in Indianola and for that little kid named Dylan who just might want to open up their own snow cone business affordably on the East Side Trail of the Beltline, because we all know we do need a snow cone business on the East Side Trail of the Beltline. Any 13-year-olds watching, please talk to us. We will provide you with a shipping container pod as soon as possible. So the question is, well, what are you going to do about it? What are your faces? I already told you my two faces. See, on one end, I come from those communities that are most impacted negatively by gentrification. On the other end, I too am a gentrifier. I reconcile that through design, through equitable development, through inclusion. And let's not mistake it. So inclusion can also mean living in a gated community where half the community are $600,000 median income townhomes and the other half are single-family homes with the median income of 1.25. That's inclusive, just doesn't include me. I'm talking about diversification of that inclusion. So don't feel too bad that there is no opportunity for a solution. We're providing you with a modular solution of reimagining space, of reutilizing, refurbishing, and recycling materials to create spaces for equitable development. That's what we do at Make Her Studio, Make Her Studio LLC. And also, inclusion isn't just how you build and who you build for and with, it's also how you hire and how you procure. So in our business at Make Her Studio, our welder is a woman, which is rare. We work with refugees here in Clarkston, which is where I used to live. So it's not enough to talk about and write reports about equity and inclusion. You actually have to practice it. See, that's the hard part. So I'm going to help you do that. First, I need you to understand and think about and marinate on the fact of who are you? Why are you here? What is your role? What is your purpose? Understand that, and then let's talk about the conversation around understanding your relationship with space and how to reimagine it. So I have a call to action. There are two things I want to work together on as an interesting community engagement initiative. There's a rap song that every time I think about this is in my head, give me 50 feet, so I want you to give me 8. I'm not asking for much. Can anyone blurt out about the average width, dimension, or size of a parking space? Wide. 8, some 9, 8, 9. 8. Of course, you have handicap spaces, have a little bit more room. Guess how wide our shipping containers are? 8 feet. So I want you to reimagine as you think about how many parking spaces that you pass, how many blighted properties that you pass that have at least 8 feet. Now multiply that by how many backyards are here in the city of Atlanta, in the Atlanta metro area that have 8 feet. Think about how many urgent care clinics. Think about how many affordable housing units. Think about how many pop-up classrooms we can now create and stack on top of each other. This is unacceptable to think that there are no solutions to inclusion. You just have to practice it and build it every day. So this is what I want you to do. One of two things. Number one, my request from the audience. Today, soon, this weekend, next week, I want you to tap a neighbor, or hopefully you know your neighbors. That's number one. Spouse, partner, friend, cousin, grandparents, kids. I want you to get a measuring tape. Please tell me you have a measuring tape. If you do not have a measuring tape, I need you to go to RDA or Howell Mill, go to Ace Hardware, and please get you one of those things. And as creatives, I'm sure we all have pads and sketchbooks and pens and pencils. And I want you, as you walk out of your house, measure 8 feet. As you walk past your car, when you leave here, measure 8 feet. I want you to reimagine what happens in 8 feet now that you think about it a little differently. How many plug-in pods, how many urgent care clinics, how many libraries can we now create in these spaces? How many artists and residences that are for affordable housing can we now create in these spaces? Understand your relationship with that space while you figure out exactly who you are and how you can help facilitate these notions of inclusivity and practice with intentionality. Call it the 8 feet campaign, if you will. I'm not a branding or PR person, but just bear with me. But give 8 feet. And I want you to journal and write down and think about what it means to you. What do you hear? What do you see in this 8 feet? What do you envision? What do you imagine? How can I, as a person, as a creator, facilitate change in just 8 feet and multiply that by all the spaces at Lenox Square Mall that never get used? How many affordable housing units can go at Lenox Mall in those parking spaces that can never be used? That's how we begin to build new systems and new ways of thinking by reimagining space and our relationship with it. My other request, and then tag me. Tag pictures, take pictures, send me information. I really would love to talk to you about how do you reimagine now the city of Atlanta based off a history that is so powerful, because really, yes, we are becoming the Black Mecca of technology, but we have always been the Black Mecca of building and construction and procurement and inclusion and community development and civil rights. That's where I come from as a native of Atlanta, because really we influence everything. So I need you to think about that as you reimagine space and tag me at Wadjisa, which is my personal account on Instagram, or Make Her Studio, which is my business. And let me know what you think. Let's have a conversation and a call to action about how can we partner to actually create new pilots, new shipping container spaces, where we begin to talk about new small businesses and facilitate that kind of conversation, where we are practicing with intentionality diversification of inclusion. A second request, excuse me, is to invest. Put your money where your mouth is. Let's partner, let's put money and funding and technical expertise and your creative acumen together and see what we can come up with and build communities that are represented, that are not underrepresented, but representative of all of us in this room and those that do not, like me, when I first came into this world, that has a stage, as a platform for social change and social impact as a change maker and a change agent. Let's invest, let's work, let's build, let's put our monies where our mouths are to create that diversified inclusion that we are talking about, where there is no gates around parks, no gates around our communities to keep things out and to keep certain things in. Let's build the change that we want to see, and let's do it together, because it's not just about me, and it really isn't about me, it's about the legacies that we have already been established that we can build off of. It's about working together, it's about collaboration, it's about practicing inclusion, that simple formula I gave you earlier, which is the direct relationship between who you are, your role in this world, and space. So like my mom says, baby, don't hide it, divide it. Don't hide your creativity, don't hide your money, don't hide your time, don't hide your technical expertise. Let's come together, let's divide it, let's be intentional about the work that we need to do to be more inclusive, to be more intentional about making a difference. Think about the return. It's not just financial, but it's also social. If the notion that you should diversify your portfolio is great for your personal generational wealth, then why wouldn't inclusion work the same way for all of our generational wealth? I don't understand why that's a problem. The more diversity, the more intention to inclusion, the more of a return we get fiscally and socially. Because what works for you works for me. What doesn't work for me doesn't work for you. If you design intersections and streets for the handicapped, if you design intersections and streets for single moms and dads or families pushing their babies across the street, or for cyclists or for pedestrians, then the streets work for everybody. So the return is simple, but it takes work. It's easy to talk about equity and inclusion. It's hard work to practice it, but it takes intention. It takes reimagining space. You see, we are all multidimensional creatures. We all have many faces, and so does that beast I told you about earlier, of gentrification and gerrymandering. And the thing about that beast of many faces is that these structures that we are grown into, that we are reared, where we were raised, has modified and molded the notion of who we are and what we are here to do. But I'm here to tell you, to help you to reimagine yourself differently, to reimagine space differently, so that we become more intentional about inclusivity. And that besides these structures, you have this idea of a certain perception at your neighborhood and your community that for some reason is this hyper-local, hyper-global sensitivity, which to me is kind of antithetical as well. How are you hyper-local and hyper-global at the same time? So I'm here to help expand this notion of where you come from, where you are today, and how you've been molded by this beast of 130 years of segregation and segregated land uses, to looking at how we can be more intentional and more inclusive by how we design spaces, how we reimagine space, how we communicate with each other. So that new systems are created, not trying to break down the existing one. Matter of fact, that's fine too. You see, because we all can't have the same role, so while there are those of you who are protesting and helping us break down systems of oppression and segregation and Confederate statues and all these things that have been so detrimental, some of us can't do that. We are too busy building things up. Because if the system failed today, would you really be ready for a new movement or revolution? That's the question. Maybe not, because the question always also comes down to who are you relative to space, because everything is relational. If we understand and reimagine space differently, if you start to look at alleyways that are 8 feet in downtown, midtown, Old Fourth Ward, not as voids, or not as cellars, but as cellar doors, as foundations for new ideas and new people and creative minds who can now afford to live there, work, play, thrive, and innovate, then all of a sudden you create new systems, and then now you have new possibilities that are endless. So that's the beauty of what we do as makers and reimagining space, that we don't see space as the glass half empty, we see life as the glass half full. always. But it takes hard work in a world and in a system that continuously pushes you to always think half empty. There's nothing about the city of Atlanta that is half empty for me. Everything that I see is an opportunity. Every space that I see is a multidimensional reflection of who we are as multidimensional creatures to do amazingly wonderful things, recreating structures, creating new systems. Get excited about that. Leverage your power as creatives to do something. And when I say do, I mean be active. Know your neighbors. Give 8 feet. Understand what can be done every 8 feet. That's a lot of space. That's a lot of change that we could create pretty quickly and affordably. Whether we're using our shipping containers, or whether we're just having a conversation, whether we're measuring and writing down what our experiences are. So I ask you, what are your 2 faces? I know what mine are. You see, on one end, I come from communities that are most negatively impacted by gentrification, and on the other, I too am a gentrifier. Thank you.